You either die a hero, or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain.
If you had it, what would you do to keep your celebrity? Let's say you had a bite at the apple, but you sensed your time was fading. Well, how far would you go? Who would you sell out for just a small bit of warmth from that limelight again? Your wife, kids, brother, sister?
I had a fucking awful childhood. I have no contact with my terrible parents now. I tried really, really hard to reconcile with them. I tried really hard to get them to understand what how they had made me feel. I tried really hard to heal together, and they just weren't having it. They are narcissist boomers who are just like, you're too sensitive.
But shut up, Wesley.
This is the sad, ongoing tale of Wil Wheaton. From hated smart aleck kid ruining a beloved franchise to somewhat lovable, self-aware underdog to a bitter shell of a man. Someone who spends 24/7 wallowing in his self-made misery, chasing the elusive fame that he had. But before we get into the current story, let's look back a little and set the table, shall we? Wil was born in 1972, so he's 50 years old. Yeah, he is now older than Patrick Stewart was when he started playing Picard. Wow. Wil's father, Richard, was at one time a technical cardiovascular specialist of some renown. His mother, Debbie, was a model and actress of little note, but it was actually she and her modest industry connections who set Wil on the career course that he would claim to have always hated, yet never really gave up, and enjoys the fruits of to this very day. He also has a younger brother and sister. After acting in commercials, Wil got his big break in the movie Stand By Me in 1986. That led to his seminal role as Wesley Crusher in Star Trek: The Next Generation. Now, being the cousin Oliver or Scrappy-Doo of a beloved franchise led to a lot of fan backlash, and let's be fair, it probably was a bit cruel at times. You know, Wil didn't write the terrible season 1 storylines where he was a Gary Stu boy wonder. But when the adults finally did seize control of the show from Gene Roddenberry, it got noticeably better. And perhaps not coincidentally, Wil's role was drastically reduced. By the time he bid adieu to the show with his best bud, the Traveler, Wil had temporarily had enough of acting and dropped off the radar for a bit, moving to Kansas and working on something called Video Toaster. During this time, he met his wife, Anne, and when he moved back to LA, he became a stepdad to her kids and started to take up acting classes again. He began working in some indie films. Up until now, people probably didn't think or remember very much of Wil, except when they saw Next Generation reruns. But then in 2001, he started a blog, wilwheaton.net. It was at first written with some brutal candidness and refreshing energy. Over the next several years, Wil slowly crept back into the limelight by owning the awfulness of Wesley Crusher while still defending the role in a self-deprecating way. He earned some kudos. He was a proud early adopter of nerd culture. Suddenly, the kid that everyone wanted to punch on Star Trek was kind of cool in a dorky way. He coined a motto that everyone at the time seemed to like. Don't be a dick. Wheaton's Law. He talked about things like D&D, role-playing, music, horror movies, board games. His popularity grew. Pretty soon, Wil appeared on the incredibly successful Big Bang Theory as himself. He also started to write books. He truly was the king of the nerds. But in time, that crown began to slip, and the real Wil Wheaton began to reveal himself. So in my opinion, Wil's fall started with an incident in 2015 on the very popular YouTube show called Tabletop, which he hosted. Each episode, Wil would play a board game with other D-list celebrities, family, and friends. And for a while, it was pretty entertaining. But in season 3, people started to notice that he was screwing up the rules in a lot of games. And it all came to a head in the Kingdom Builder episode. which was botched so badly rules-wise that it could no longer be ignored, even by its most diehard fans. So how did the King of the Nerds address these issues? I mean, surely he'd take ownership of this and, as the top dog on the show, say that it was his responsibility, the buck stopped with him, and just promise to make sure it never happened again, right? Nope. He blamed it all on a producer. I am furious and I'm embarrassed, and I need to put this here so I can just refer to it when this almost certainly happens again this season. We had a producer whose primary job was to make sure we knew the rules to the games and played correctly. I trusted this producer to be on top of these things, and I trusted him to ensure we played the games properly. For the first 2 seasons, he did a great job. Everyone makes mistakes now and then, but something happened in the 3rd season. I don't know if this producer was careless, overwhelmed, didn't care as deeply as previous seasons, or just didn't do the same amount of preparation that was done for the first 2 seasons. I don't know why he failed to do the most important part of his job so many times this season, but I'm pretty fucking pissed off that the person I trusted to make sure that we played the games correctly let me down. I trusted this producer so completely. I spent my time and energy on other aspects of production. I feel embarrassed by this. Listen to the rather shocking narcissism in that post. It was all about him. And let's be fair, on a modest YouTube show, despite its popularity, Wil had final say over everything on that set. So throwing a producer under the bus doesn't even begin to describe what he did. He threw him under the bus, got into the bus, drove over him, backed up, drove over him again. And even his most rabid fans were pretty much aghast at this behavior. Wil seemed to have trouble understanding what the issue was. He was a celebrity after all, and only the small people take the fall for these types of things, right? Dare I say, Wil was acting like a dick. Not to mention the hypocrisy of someone who says that he loves playing these games on his own, blaming someone else for not teaching him the rules properly. It made a lot of people rethink their opinion of Wil Wheaton. Now, Wil has always been politically liberal, but like most of his Hollywood brethren, the election of Donald Trump turned him into an unhinged leftist lunatic. Something snapped. Maybe it was Trump's own narcissism that struck too close to him. And millions of other leftists. Their own self-hatred morphed into a comfortable hatred of the rich orange man who was oppressing them daily. There was more bad news for Wil when his buddy Chris Hardwick was Me Too'd by an ex-girlfriend in 2018. Wil had earlier expressed unqualified support for the Me Too movement, but was curiously silent during this time, and people started to notice. When Hardwick responded and claimed his accuser was lying, Wil immediately supported his pal, calling this woman a liar. Instead of diplomatically handling the situation, Wil once more came off as a hypocritical dick. Pressure was mounting and frustration was setting in. The facade of Wil the likable geek was falling apart. Pretty soon after all of this, he quit Twitter outright, and then somehow managed to get himself kicked off of Mastodon, which was a Twitter replacement, perhaps his lowest ebb at the time. But here's where a new angle started to occur to Wil. Maybe he noticed the cachet and, frankly, bundles of cash that can be made by being neurally divergent or some other type of victim. Whatever happened, Wil's snap was pretty sudden. He started barraging the world with a lot of boilerplate victim narratives. He told the world that he conquered his alcoholism, a problem nobody seemed to have any awareness of until he said he was quitting. There's not one embarrassing public incident detailed. From what I could tell, there's no run-ins with the police, nothing. Kind of like came out of the blue. And then, not suicide, Wil. No, please don't. Stop. And of course, nothing will get you more ass-pats these days than publicly listing.
So I have Mayim, these are my disorders. I have complex post-traumatic stress disorder from my father's abuse. I have generalized anxiety disorder.
GAD, as we call it.
And I have chronic major depression disorder.
Got it.
And I'm not ashamed of any of that. None of that is my fault.
So in the summer of 2018, Wil broached the subject of having been made a child actor against his will. And because it's modern day, nobody thought to ask why he continued to act well into adulthood and has enjoyed the fruits of his celebrity, no matter how minor, that his acting has brought him. Now, initially, Wil was diplomatic. He said that his parents simply might have been unaware of the fact that acting wasn't his thing, even though it sort of was his thing. He didn't blame them at first, but the initial publicity died down and Wil was still floundering. It seemed acting roles after The Big Bang Theory had kind of dried up. His only recourse would be to start begging for roles on the horrible reboot of Star Trek on Paramount. So about a year later, he made an Instagram post, and this time he went in on his parents hard, throwing them to the wolves. He replied to a commenter who inquired about his parents' involvement. My mother basically ran my entire life, and when my dad wasn't bullying me, he didn't notice I existed. This caught fire, and for the last 3 years, Wil has done nothing, and I mean nothing, but cry about the abuse his parents allegedly gave him. He's been interviewed on Access Hollywood and other outlets, becoming more bitter and vitriolic as time has gone on. He refers to his dad as the man who was my father, a bullying brute who humiliated Wil at every turn. He paints his mom as the ultimate stage mom, even though she steered Wil clear of the fates of the Feldmans, the Hames, the Phoenixes. He claims she turned a blind eye to the abuse he suffered at the hands of his father. It's safe to say that right now, Wil hates his mom and dad. The funny thing is, Wil has had a blog for over 20 years now. It's pretty easy to go back and see his mindset during the early years, before these allegations. I'll also remind you that he started this blog as a 30-year-old independent married man and stepfather, not some innocent, scared boy. He'd been out of the nest for a long time by the early 2000s. Now, curiously, Wil's brother and sister have a very different relationship with his parents.
He was so emotionally abusive to me. Like, he adores my brother and is wonderful with my sister and just clearly made a choice. Just made an like, one day was just like, I just don't like this kid.
If I showed all of Wil's attacks on his parents, this video would be 3 hours long. It's literally all he does now. Just Google it. But this clip is essentially a microcosm of Wil's incessant whining over the last few years.
I have no contact with my parents. They're not great people. My father is an abusive bully. My mother enabled him, protected him, and really used me to fulfill her need to be famous.
Wil is very cruel to the woman who gave him life and a career that, to this day, he enjoys the benefits from. And he's not once seriously tried to quit and step out of the limelight like a Rick Moranis. He loves his fame, and he's too selfish and narcissistic to understand that his mother was also the reason for many of the good things that happened to him. Here he was after he initially came out about the fact that he was forced into acting. Mom, I know you're going to read this and hear this, and I know it's going to make you upset. I want you to know that I love you. And I know that you did the very best you could. I'm telling my story, though, so someone else's mom can see things that maybe you didn't, through no fault of your own. And here he is reaching out to his mom on something much earlier. But note the way he describes her voice, like a warm blanket fresh from the dryer. He notes that she's always glad to hear from him, and later on, he says that he's happy that he made her proud. Listen to this clip of Wil talking about his early career.
Stand By Me happens. I become famous. It's weird. I don't like it. The fame and the attention of fame is incredibly important to my mother.
The fame is only important to Mom. Wil hates fame, apparently. But shortly after Stand By Me, Wil did a movie in 1987 called The Curse, which he hated doing for a variety of reasons. But I found one reason in particular very enlightening. I read it. I didn't like it. It was a shitty horror movie, and I saw that right away. I told my parents I didn't like it and didn't want to do it. I clearly recall thinking it was a piece of shit that would hurt my career. The boy who didn't want to act, who just wanted to be a kid mom, who hated fame, in his own words, is talking about this movie potentially hurting his career. Very calculating, and in retrospect, very hypocritical. It's quite clear he wanted a long career in acting and enjoyed the fame. Thanks, Mom. I think he's becoming like O.J. Simpson, believing the lie more than the truth. I half expect him to release a book at this point entitled, If I Was a Dick. Wil saves the worst for his dad, though.
I had not yet put together that the man who was my father is just an asshole. He's selfish, he's cruel, he's a bully. Nothing I was ever going to do was ever going to be enough for that man, ever.
He calls him a bully, awful, selfish, cruel, racist, and narcissistic. Something he does all the time now. Yet here's Wil talking about the absolutely great time he had with his father and his stepson as they went bowling. This was when Wil was almost 40 years old. So what do you believe? Was he lying then, or is he lying now? After reading a lot of his earlier blog, it's hard not to conclude that he was a much happier, nicer, and peaceful person back then. Nothing, I think, sums up the hypocritical change in Wil than his recounting of the Wheaton family Christmas in 2005 that he wrote for Salon.com. At the time, there was the case of a 4-time convicted murderer, Tukey Williams, whose clemency fate, as it happened, was going to be revealed on the very date of the Wheaton family Christmas party. Wil saw his sister watching court TV, waiting for the decision, and he assumed she, like he, was in favor of commuting the death sentence to life in prison. But she wasn't. Soon Wil's dad learned that Wil was in favor of commuting the sentence, and he flipped out. Instead of giving his dad the benefit of the doubt that he was thinking of the victims and the family's need for justice and closure, Wil made it about them being later life Republicans who were being poisoned by talk radio. But during the course of the article, Wil wrote a few interesting things about his dad. What a difference 5 minutes makes. While he screamed at me, I wanted to ask, who are you? And what have you done with the man who raised me to be tolerant, patient, peaceful, and charitable? And then later on, I wanted to say something brilliant and insightful, something irrefutable that would maybe find its way into the man who used to wear a ridiculous perm and Hawaiian shirts and embarrass me in front of my friends with big bear hugs and pull my finger jokes when he dropped me off at school. Doesn't sound too bullying to me. His mother actually came over after that article came out and was rightfully pissed at their portrayal as right-wing Rush Limbaugh clones. And perhaps only in retrospect, Wil, incredibly enough, agreed that he had no right to make those assumptions. And he wrote this in his blog, giving them their say. I learned that my parents still hold the values of compassion, tolerance, and charity, which they instilled in me as a child, even if the politicians they support do not. So what are we left with? What happened to Wil to cause him to ignore 40 years of apparent goodwill and happiness? I'm sure his parents were a bit demanding, but he certainly reaped the benefit of the lifestyle they set him on course for. A diplomatic person would say, I wouldn't have any of this. My life, my career, my wife, my stepkids. If it weren't for my mom being a guiding force, even if she pushed me hard at times and kept me out of trouble and helped me escape the fate of so many tragic child actors. Basically, doing what a mature person would do, taking the good with the bad. But I honestly think Will's incapable of such equanimity and understanding, in part because of the leftist poisoning in his mind. That ideology's incapable of mercy for anyone who opposes it. And Will has admitted that his parents are now full-blown Republicans. Millions of families suffer the fractured fate of the Wheatons. Just Google my Trump-loving uncle at Thanksgiving and how to deal with them. I also think there's a healthy dose of self-interest here. As I stated, being a victim will keep you relevant. And it's worked in Will's case. New headlines pop up all the time as he spouts the same hatred over and over and over again about his parents. But it's hard to ignore the fact that his brother and sister have a loving relationship with his parents. Maybe the problem is Will, after all. Listen here as he's talking about his stepchildren's biological father.
We had been in family therapy. Anne's ex-husband is a fucker.
Are you seeing a pattern? Will's not a nice guy. He's the very definition of a selfish, toxic person who never finds fault in anything that he does. He seems to relish the cruelty he inflicts on his mother and father with every interview. Everyone's parents have the universal fate of not being perfect. Will has shown time and again in his early blog that he was a happy young man with fond memories of childhood. I encourage you, go to his blog and check it out yourself. He's chosen to obsess on times where his parents maybe weren't quite perfect. But I'd only ask that you focus on the traits that he himself has used to describe his parents. In his own words: compassion, tolerance, charity, love. A combination of leftism and celebrity is a virulent toxin, and it's poisoned the one-time king of the nerds. It's hard to say whether he'll ever be normal again, but we can hope and pray that he does come around. If not for his fans, and for himself, for the parents who have to be suffering immensely. I hope you enjoyed watching this video as much as I enjoyed making it for you. If you did, go ahead and throw a like on it. And if you want to help the channel grow, go ahead and subscribe and share this video out there. I appreciate each and every one of you. Goodbye, and until we meet again, take care.